All right, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you a couple of tools that you can use that are really simple and easy to use that will allow you to really lock down Windows Defender and make it a lot more secure than it is by default. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. So like I said, this stuff is really simple and easy to use. I'm going to go ahead and explain the tools to you. There's not a ton of documentation on it, so some people might have already looked at these tools and be like, oh, well, what does this option do, or what does this feature do? I'm going to explain that because I've been using these tools for a while and I think they work really well, like them quite a bit. So first off, as far as where you can download them, these two tools are made by the same person, Andy Ful. You can download both of these through GitHub. He mentioned on here that there's a fake domain, hardconfigurator.com, that's being used to spread malware, and the only place you can find these for downloads on other places, and they might be legit. I recommend that if you're going to download these, that you get them only from ConfigureDefender or only from GitHub, and that you download directly from the person that made them. Like I said, it's Andy Ful. So we're going to download two different tools. We're going to download and take a look at ConfigureDefender and Hard Configurator. Like I said, they're made by the same person. You'll also notice on GitHub, usually the releases will be over here with files that you can click to download. That doesn't work with these. You have to click the code button and then download zip for both of these. So once you download those, we'll go ahead and get this open up. First, we'll take a look at ConfigureDefender. So when you launch this up, it looks like it's got a pretty simple user interface, which it is, which is nice. It's really clean and simple to use. You'll notice there's preset protection levels up here that you can select. And if you click on the info button, it'll bring up a README file that will show you what it is that each protection setting uses. Now, I've used the max protection setting for a long time. There's a warning that he has on here that says that that can cause a lot of false positives. He's documented that on his website. If you want to, there was a video made, I think it was 2 or 3 years back, where Leo from the PC Security Channel tested this at the max setting. I think it was with a bunch of ransomware, and it ended up blocking like every single sample. So it does work pretty well. Some people thought that, well, maybe it's just because it's got default block settings on, which, I mean, it's fine. And I've used this tool for quite a while now. Very, very few times have I ever had false positives. So you could use the max setting if you want to, or you could pick just like high is definitely a step up from the default settings. Interactive means it will warn you about stuff that's going on, but it won't automatically block it like it will with the max setting. So I'll just go ahead and click on the max setting so people can see what that looks like. So it says it's suited to home administrators who want this to secure the computers of children or family members. It requires more maintenance and attention. Like I said, I haven't really noticed this. Like I've used this tool for probably at least a couple of years now, at least a solid 2 years. And there's only been a very small few occasions where I actually did have issues with this working properly, to where I had to go back in and toggle it down to like the default settings just to run a file to get it to work, because I knew the file was legitimate. There was no reason for it to be blocked. And I'm going to go over what causes like 95% of that here in just a moment. So we'll go ahead and click continue here. It will say some folders were excluded and attack service reduction to avoid possible issues. And then it also says if you apply protection on the computer of a child casual user, it's recommended to hide the Windows Security Center. This prevents them from going and changing settings. If you're using the computer for yourself and you're not making changes for another person that you're worried is going to screw something up, I would say just go ahead and keep it on hidden so you can go in and change stuff around as you need to. So let's go ahead and start working through these different options so people know what it is that they're looking at here. So behavior monitoring, this means that it's a real-time protection method like pretty much every other antivirus has. It's actively keeping an eye on anything that's so like any sort of running process or anything that's running in RAM, anything like that. It's keeping an eye on that actively. Block at first sight. This is something that can help protect you against malware that hasn't been officially identified yet. This is kind of like a heuristics where it can look at a file and say, okay, well, this is malicious, even though we don't have a signature for the file yet. Let's just go ahead and block this. Cloud delivered protection just means that it uses cloud analysis to help block threats. This is really good to have. This adds a lot of protection because if you just rely on the computer stuff, this is pretty much standard in all antivirus these days, is to have some sort of cloud protection. So it's good to have this on because it can check the file in the cloud and make sure that it's another step of verification. It doesn't work 100% of the time. Antivirus is never 100%, but it does help. Automatic sample submission just means that it automatically sends samples off of like any sort of file, so that way if there's something malicious that comes up, it helps Microsoft create a signature for it, so that signature can be pushed out to all the other Windows users. Scan all downloaded files and attachments. This one's pretty obvious. This is a really good one to have on because especially with stuff that you might download from like emails or something like that, you can end up with viruses on there. That's a pretty common way of spreading viruses. Script scanning. This scans any JavaScript files, any VB script, anything like that. This is potentially unwanted app protection here. So it's good to have this on, and usually this is on in the Windows Security Center by default. Cloud protection level. So there's a few different options on here, and maybe I missed it somewhere in the documentation because I didn't see any sort of documentation that came with the tool. But from as far as I can tell on this, so this checks the file to see if it's legitimate. So there's obviously the default setting. And this is checking against basically a list of like known malicious files and things like that. Now, if you go high and highest, it sets a higher parameter, so there's more of a chance that you'll get false positives, things that are blocked that are actually legitimate. This is one of the things that I have of the very few times I've ever had any issues with this tool of false positives. 95% of it has been because of this setting right here. And as far as I can tell, so I looked through Microsoft documentation for this, and the only thing I could find for this block setting was that it blocks all untrusted files. But again, I couldn't find any further detail than that. But from what I've noticed when I've tested this setting is that it will automatically block some of these unknown weird files that you might download. If there's no internet connection, it will just block them automatically and it won't allow you to run the file. Whereas if you turn the setting down, it will allow the file to run, or if you have the internet connection come back, then even if it's set to block, it will allow stuff to run. Because I've ran some really weird software, I do quite a bit of stuff with my computer, and even then, this has very rarely been an issue for me. The cloud check time limit, this one's pretty important, although you shouldn't ever see anything close to it taking this long to check the file. What this is a timeout function. So let's say, so in this case, at the max setting, it's 60 seconds. It's like 20 seconds by default. That means that it's sending the file for it to be checked through a cloud analysis. Let's say everything looks good locally, but maybe it is a malicious file, but it sends it to the cloud for analysis. If it doesn't get a verdict back within that 60 seconds, it will go ahead and allow the file to run. And by default, like I said, it's 20 seconds. So that means that even if it were malicious, if it can't check the file for whatever reason, if it couldn't check it within that time, it will allow it to run, which could be a problem. But like I said, I don't know why you would really ever see it take anywhere close to that long. Average CPU load while scanning, pretty self-explanatory, just like how much CPU will be used by Windows Defender, like max amount while it is scanning for like doing a full system scan or whatever. Smart screen, this is stuff to check files that are getting downloaded through Explorer, Edge, and Internet Explorer. I don't know why anyone would even still be using Internet Explorer, but through Edge, for example, I would not rely on this function. That's all. That's all I'm gonna say about that one. Now you can manage attack surface reduction exclusions in here if you click that. I would not recommend changing any of this stuff. You could add exclusions in here. I don't think it's a great idea. If you do need to add something, you probably already know what it is and why you would need to do it. But this isn't something that you need to mess with at all. Next thing, productivity apps. These can cause a lot of problems. So it says block Win32 API calls from Office macros, block Office applications from creating child processes, creating executable content, injecting in other processes. The reason why this is even a function to begin with is because a ton of viruses, malware in general, is spread through a lot of Word documents and PDF files because you can embed JavaScript and macros, all this kind of stuff inside of these files. And there's plenty of other YouTube videos out there that you can find. Leo from the PC Security channel had a video where it was a fake sponsor that sent him an email, and it was a legitimately worded email, and they sent him some documents. This actually happened to quite a few people. But then a lot of times these documents will have some sort of malicious macro, and where once you go and open up that Office document or open up that PDF, it executes the malicious JavaScript or whatever it is that it has in there. and then it can hijack your computer and install a bunch of malware. So that's why it's good to have this stuff on. This can obviously break stuff if you're a heavy Microsoft Office user and you're using a lot of macros. These settings could be an issue. So if you run into those issues, then that's a sign that you might need to turn off the ability to do this. But again, I use Microsoft Word. I haven't noticed any issues with it, but again, that could be something that you may potentially run into. Script rules, these are also really important because these spread a lot of malware as well. So this option says block JavaScript and VB script from launching downloaded executable content, meaning that if there's some sort of a executable that gets downloaded for, like, let's say JavaScript, that it will block it from being able to launch that executable content. That is really important because a lot of viruses can spread this way, where you have malicious JavaScript that will execute and then it tries to download a malicious payload. So this is a very good setting to have on. Unless you're a power user and you're using, let's say, Java or VB script for whatever reason, maybe it could cause an issue. But again, and I've even been working with JavaScript lately, and I haven't had any issues with this. The other one is block execution of potentially obfuscated scripts. This one's pretty self-explanatory because scripts should not be obfuscated in any way, and if they are, very big chance that it's going to be malicious of some kind. Email rules block only Office communication applications from creating child process. This is something good to have on. Obviously, viruses can spread through Office. And then block executable content from email client and webmail. This is also good to have on because it can help block anything malicious coming through and something like an attachment. Now, there's some other important functions here that we're going to cover real quick. So this is another one. Now, this is one that I've had a few issues with. In fact, I just had one recently with Mulvad browser because a Mulvad browser needed an update. So it says block executable files from running unless they meet a prevalence, age, or trusted list criteria. Now that is covered in here and we'll get to that shortly. This is really the only other issue that I've had was this one. So I'm going to cover this one more here shortly when we get to reading in here. Block credential stealing for Windows local security. So this is the lsass.exe. It's a system of protecting credentials. So obviously that's good to have on. And then there's other things like block process creations from psexec and Windows Management Instrument commands. Windows Management Instrument can be used to spread a lot of Windows Management Instrument can actually be used to spread fileless malware. So it's actually good because if it can set up if fileless malware is able to, if it can set up WMI commands, that can be how it executes malware. Like every time you log on to your computer, you reboot it or whatever, how you have persistent malware that's fileless that you don't know about. So this is a good option to have. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Block untrusted unsigned processes that run from USB. Use advanced protection against ransomware. I'm not 100% sure what this one does. We're going to cover some more ransomware stuff here in a second. Block persistence through Windows Management Instrumentation event subscription. This is also good to have on. Kind of similarly to here, fileless malware can use this. And then block abuse of exploitable, vulnerable signed drivers. Now this is good to have on. Windows Defender basically already has this. So if you go into Windows Defender, you can look and see, so the Windows vulnerable driver block list. So this is something that's good to have on. Every now and then you might come across like some weird driver that you know should be working. An example of something that's like a vulnerable signed driver, this was a while back and I think it's been fixed since then, was the MHYPROT2.sys. It was an anti-cheat driver for things like Genshin Impact, and it was being used to spread ransomware on people's computers, and you didn't even have to have the game installed. The malware attackers were literally able to just bundle the driver file to spread the ransomware. So that's where things like this come into play. It's obviously good to have that on. Network protection. This is, I did a little bit of searching on this one. It seems like this is an extension of Smart Screen, where it checks outgoing traffic to make sure that you're not trying to connect to, like, let's say a malicious domain. This is not something I would depend on. I don't think it works all that great. I would still say the better option for something like that would be if you want something that's blocking stuff before you go to like a malware site. I mean, it's good to obviously have it on. It's definitely not going to hurt anything, but I would say it's better to have something like encrypted DNS with filtering, so something like DNS 0 or Quad 9. Now, controlled folder access. So when you turn this on to the max setting, it will turn on controlled folder access. And I tested this again just a couple of months ago. This program is still an absolute turd. So when Microsoft first turned this on, when they gave this as an option, however many years ago it was, I tried it out and it causes all sorts of false positives. It does not work well. Like you'll go to launch a game or a legitimate app. And even when a couple of months ago, I tried this on a fresh install of Windows, I was running some updates and was even getting pop-ups, little notifications down here for Windows Defender saying that there is an issue with Windows because controlled folder access thought that this Windows file was trying to make malicious changes, even though it was a legitimate Windows file. So I mean, I've noticed stuff like that. It doesn't work well. So I would say the best option here, if you don't want to deal with false positives and you don't want to have to constantly click on, like every time you launch a new game or launch an app that needs to make some sort of app data folder. Otherwise, you'll be going in and making exceptions constantly for every time an app gets installed. I would say disabling this is fine, but again, you'll need to come to that conclusion on your own if you want to disable that, but I think this is a turd. It's supposed to protect against ransomware. I'm just pretty unimpressed with controlled folder access, so it's something I prefer to disable. Now, there's a couple of things in documentation for this app that we're going to check, and then we're going to move on to the other app and start wrapping this video up. So there's a couple of things in here that are important to know. So the first thing, one of the things I mentioned has been an issue, and like I said, this was an issue with the Mulvad browser update that came out just a few days ago. Block executable files from running unless they meet a prevalence, age, or trusted list criteria. This is a strong prevention against polymorphic malware, but one has to accept the high rate of false positives for application installer/updaters, which, like I said, this was an issue that came up recently. So polymorphic malware, for those who are unaware, just a really simple overview of it. It's a really advanced piece of malware that's able to make changes to its code and basically evolve. So Virlock is an example of that. It's a piece of ransomware where it can evolve its code. And so that's where, when it starts making changes, then obviously it creates a new signature, but if there's no signatures for it, that's why it's important to have things like heuristics enabled. And that's also why having this function is nice, because because it creates basically these new files, like if it's trying to spread a new type of exe or DLL that hasn't been caught yet, is because then it gets blocked because it's not on the prevalence, age, or trusted list criteria. So in the issue where the Mulvad browser update pushed out just a few days ago, I had a pop-up come up on Windows Defender saying that it had blocked the update, and I clicked on it to find out why, because I was like, well, Mulvad browser's legit, why did it block it? And it said because it had not met this rule here, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. I didn't need to use it anyway. So it says the prevalence is related to 1,000 machines and age to 24 hours. The trusted list criteria managed by Microsoft. This rule can recognize the executable as suspicious only when Defender can connect to Microsoft Cloud. From my experience, most executable files are blocked by this rule are allowed after 48 hours. So what I noticed, I just left Mulvad alone because I use a bunch of other browsers anyway. And as of earlier today, the update finally pushed out and ran, and now Mulvad's running fine again. I didn't make any changes to anything. I was like, whatever, it'll come back here in a day or two anyway, so I wasn't worried about it. But if you do notice something that you think's legit, but I would say, so like I said, it's 1,000 machines and age to 24 hours. So if you download let's say a file that's like 10 years old. This has been super rare that I've ran into this. If you have like a really old file, that means that hardly anyone has actually used it. So that's just something that maybe use a little more caution. Maybe you'd want to run the file through something like VirusTotal to just make sure it's legitimate. But that is one thing that you'll notice might be an issue that you potentially might have to go into ConfigureDefender and turn off if you're trying to run something legitimate. Then it talks about this other, I've already covered this. I'm not going to cover it again. It's also covered controlled folder access. Like I said, that thing's kind of a turd. So that about wraps that up for this app. So you can just go ahead if you want to. Like I said, I've ran Max for a couple of years now at least, and it works great. I haven't had any issues with it. Like I said, very, very rarely, maybe once every 4 months or even less, have I ever had an issue with where I had to go back in and turn the protection settings down to get a file to run. So if you just leave it at max, stuff should work fine. And then if there's anything in here you need to tweak for your needs, it's pretty simple to do so. So let's take a look now at Hard Configurator. So this is kind of like a companion tool for ConfigureDefender. Now, what I would recommend people using, because I'm all about keeping things simple, simple Windows hardening is really good. You can do the more complicated version here, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to do this because we're keeping it simple. You'll notice when you download this, there's two different versions. So this 2001, this is for older versions of Windows. If you're running Windows 22 H2 or newer, you will have to run this one. This older version will not work because there were some changes. When Windows pushed out the 22 H2 update, they made some changes to the software restriction policies that Windows uses. So the guy that made the application had to go and make updates to it. So we're going to go ahead and run this file. I'm going to show you how this works. I'll just give you a real quick rundown of it. So when you open it for the first time, it will take a moment. First of all, you're going to get this one that says wrong setting, SWH applied the correct software restriction policy restrictions to allow running high privilege processes. That's fine, don't worry about it. We're running this for the first time, so you'll get that. And it'll say basic settings have been applied. It says these changes have been made to Windows Registry, but some settings are not yet activated. Please exit SWH, Simple Windows Hardening, to fully apply the protection. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and exit out of here. And it says, do you want to restart the computer to apply the new configuration? In order for this to work, you need to restart it, so we'll go ahead and do that real quick. All right, so now that we're done with that, I've got the computer rebooted. I'm going to go ahead and relaunch the tool here, and then I will show you what this does. So this does a few things to harden Windows against attacks. So if we go up here to the little settings menu, you can see protected SRP extensions. Let's go ahead and click on that, and I will show you what that does. And it also does a few other things. So it will restrict things like PowerShell scripts. So I will add this. If you're a power user, you're probably going to have some issues here. So you don't need to use this, by the way. It is just like I said, it's a companion tool that adds a little bit of extra security. But if you're a power user, you could run into some issues. I'm running PowerShell scripts constantly because PowerShell is just something I use on just about a daily basis. So obviously for me, it's an issue if I run this all the time on my computer. But if you don't have any reason to be using things like admin PowerShell scripts, then it's just fine to run this. But you'll notice you will end up probably running into some issues at some point sooner or later, and I want to show you how to fix those and what's going on there. So these are a list of extensions that get automatically blocked, and there's quite a few. And for good reason, because things like bat files, things like command files, things like PowerShell scripts that are in here, these can all be used to, VB script is another one. These can all be used to spread malware. So what this does now, so I created a command prompt file on the desktop here, and I'm going to go ahead and try to execute that so you'll see what happens. It will block it automatically, and it says your system administrator has blocked this program. For more information, contact your system administrator. So if you notice that, let's say you have a legit command file or legit whatever it is that you need to run, what you have to do is you have to go back into here to disable that temporarily, or you could just remove that file out of there entirely, so then it just will allow it to run whenever you want it to, but then you could have all the other extensions blocked out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and go to System Settings, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the command file out of here. And by the way, you can go add it in later if you want to. You can go ahead and type in CMD, and it would add it back in here. I'm just going to go ahead and remove it. And then we'll go ahead and close the program, and I'll double click on it. And now it ran, I didn't put anything in the command file, but it was able to run fine without not having any issues with being blocked. Now there is quite a bit of documentation goes along with this. There's really not much reason for me to get into the documentation on this because like I said, this tool is just really simple and it's really easy to come in here and toggle this stuff off if you're having any sort of issues with it at all. But for the most part, you should just be able to just toggle off whatever extension it is that you need to run, or like I said, if you need to run admin PowerShell scripts for whatever reason, then you can go ahead and enable that. But like I said, these are two really simple, easy to use tools that harden Defender way better, because vanilla Windows Defender, it's kind of crappy. Like Microsoft has done a lot to improve it, but they still have a long ways to go. But if you come in and run just these two tools, if you just run ConfigureDefender by itself, you don't even need to worry about Hard Configurator. If you just run this by itself and set it to max settings, the protection level, and at least as far as I can tell, would rival basically any big name provider out there like Kaspersky or Bitdefender. And hard configuration is basically the cherry on the top if you really wanted to go for just that little bit extra. Anyway, that's gonna wrap the video up. This one was super long-winded, so if you made it this far, I appreciate it as always, and I always appreciate the support. With all that being said, I will see you in the next video.